Welcome to the EchoCast, the podcast about video game news, speculation, rumors, and reviews. I'm your host Morgan, aka Von Diesel, and this week we'll be covering new Star Wars Outlaws info, Starfield Settled Systems shorts, Diablo 4 controversies, and much more. A few things before we get started. Subscribe to the show on your favorite podcast platform, and on YouTube, please subscribe to the channel, hit the like button, and comment with your thoughts, questions for next week, or to just say hello. A special thank you to all of my patrons, including producer level patrons, Hassan and Horseman, supporter level patrons, PK, The Dawn, Cage Nephilim, and Neuronix, as well as viewer level patron, Zinra. If you're interested in supporting this podcast and getting ad-free episodes for as little as $1 per month, check out patreon.com/BonDiesel. Okay, let's get into the gaming news. This week we have a bunch of topics. So as you may or may not know, this is a catch-up episode. I did not record last week, and in fact, this one's a bit late. I had COVID, then my family got COVID, and it also happens to be a very busy time of the year for us personally. So here we go. And just a reminder, that means that this news is going to, be some stuff from the last couple weeks. Star Wars Outlaws new details. There was an interview with Julian Garrity, as well as I think some others. This is kind of a smattering of info from the last couple weeks. And Julian Garrity being the creative director, I believe, of Outlaws. He was also the creative director of Division 1 and 2. And he likes to talk. You can tell he enjoys interviews. And so from those interviews, we got some new information about the Star Wars Outlaws game set to come out next year. The worlds are around the size of 2 Assassin's Creed Odyssey map regions. We're expected to have 4 to 5 and maybe even more worlds that we can explore. There's no procedural generation, so that all of the worlds that we do explore and all of the areas are going to be handcrafted. There's predetermined landing areas for your ship, and it is not a 200 to 300 hour epic, but instead will be a much shorter, but still content significant game. So all of this stuff is good to me. The Assassin's Creed Odyssey thing was funny because a lot of pundits and stuff tried to kind of overanalyze that, be like, well, in Assassin's Creed Odyssey, some parts of the map are like as big as all of the first 3 games combined. And I suspect that if you think about the general, maybe the average size of one of the Assassin's Creed Odyssey map regions, and then, you look at 2 or 3 of those, that's, probably what he was talking about rather than one extreme or the other. So that's a good size. That reminds me of of Star Wars Jedi Survivor, where some of the open world areas there were big and expansive, but they weren't so big that you felt like you were like lost or that it was just filler or fluff. So, and if there's 4 or 5 worlds that size, that seems perfect. That's I assume we'll have different biomes and stuff like that, and we know we have Tatooine already because you can't have a Star Wars thing without that planet, but I suspect that we'll see something in the jungle, in the snow, maybe some industrial place, a city or something. So that seems about right to me, and I think that sounds really good. The no procedural generation is good. Whether you like the Division 1 or 2, I think any reasonable person would look at those games and be able to acknowledge that the environmental storytelling and design and detail is insane. And so to know that they aren't using any weird tech to make like filler space, and that the developers who have done such a good job with the environments in Division 1 and 2 are going to be doing the same thing or have done the same thing with these planets, that's really exciting. And I think anyone should be pumped about that, no matter how you felt about their last couple games. Predetermined landing areas, that shouldn't be too surprising. It seems like there will be freedom with controlling your spacecraft in space and with combat and maneuverability, things like that. But when it comes to landing spots, like, this game isn't going to be No Man's Sky. It's, going to likely be more restricted than that, and that's okay. This game isn't meant to be that. So I think this is fine, especially with these worlds being large but not impossibly large, and seems like we're very likely going to have the ability to use like speeder bikes and other vehicles. I don't think that this landing thing is an issue at all. And the 200 to 300 hour epic not being a thing here. My assumption with a game like this is we're going to be looking at a game that's maybe like 40 to 50 hours max. And if the game allows for different events, depending on choices you make, that would be pretty good too, because it would keep it small enough that you could go back and replay the game if you wanted to, where, even for me, where I've been so obsessed with Mass Effect, knowing that a playthrough, even a pretty quick playthrough of Mass Effect, you're looking at a 100-hour plus dedication there. To do that over and over and over and over again it's a big commitment, and it basically means you aren't playing other things. So I think if this is like a 25 to 40 hour thing that you can get into, something you can knock out in a couple weeks, and then have multiple playthroughs if you wish, that sounds perfect. So Star Wars Outlaws just continues to be something that I'm really excited about. The big thing to me, and it may sound kind of dumb, but every time I check out a trailer or something, the score, the soundtrack, just is so epic and so good. We're about to be spoiled by that pretty soon, I think, with Starfield, which also just has this amazing kind of sound around it. But the theme that we got to hear for Outlaws during its trailers and gameplay so far has been like really, really exciting. And I don't know if they're doing that internally or not. If like Ola Strand, who's one of their music directors there, who has done the amazing Division 1 and 2 soundtracks, I don't know if they're involved in this or not, but whoever is doing it sounds great. So Star Wars Outlaws, super excited for it. Really, really pumped to hear more about it, and hopefully eventually get my little fingies on it. Okay, the Xbox and ABK acquisition. Okay, so they had a deadline themselves of July 18th, I believe. They have, or else Xbox was going to owe ABK like $3 billion or something. Well, they've obviously agreed to push that back, and they've pushed it back to October. And this is interesting because a lot of people thought that after the FTC basically gave up, which is one of the updates here, that the FTC has, I believe, will still have their case in August or September, but their appeal, they dropped it, and it seems like they're basically giving up. So a lot of people expected that maybe Xbox and ABK would just push through the acquisition. Like, all right, we'll deal with the CMA over in the United Kingdom. We'll figure them out, but let's just push this deal through and get things moving. And that didn't happen. And what's interesting is that this pushback of their deal to October signals to me that all of these rumors that the CMA is up for the renegotiation of their deal to potentially just fully approve it. This seems like an indicator to me that that's the case. It looks like Xbox and ABK are saying, okay, well, let's push it to October. And between now and October, we're going to satisfy the CMA for the United Kingdom. And we're going to just push through this deal entirely, that this deal is going through. So, and that they won't have to do any weird finagling with how they operate in the United Kingdom, because even if the CMA doesn't approve, they're going to work their way around them, is what seems to be indicated most recently. So interested to see how that's going. They did sign a deal with PlayStation for 10 years to keep Call of Duty on there. This was an interesting move because if I remember correctly, the original deal that Xbox offered up was to keep more than Call of Duty on PlayStation for, I think it was 5 years. But it seems like PlayStation said, nope, we don't care about the other IPs. We only care about Call of Duty, and we want it for 10 years guaranteed. Okay. I think that is interesting, and it's really going to put any break. It's going to put the brakes on anyone who in the future tries to say like, oh, well, like Xbox said that they would put all their, they want to keep games on all platforms. Well, they tried, they offered, and maybe there will be one-off deals, but Sony kind of said no to that deal. I've also seen people say like, well, Call of Duty won't even be relevant in 10 years. I wouldn't bet on that. and it seems like, and I am curious to what's going to happen over this decade, because what I think we're going to see happen is I think we're going to see PlayStation try really hard to establish some brand that can make up for that. I can't remember the numbers perfectly. I think they said last year that Call of Duty was responsible for almost like $1 billion of their profit. That's a big deal. It just is. Whether you like Call of Duty or not, you can, if those financials that were leaked, which I believe I'm correct, it was close to $1 billion of their sales was just Call of Duty on PlayStation. That's why they've been fighting this so hard. It seems obvious, if it wasn't before, it should be now, that was a big deal. Like that's a ton of money, especially to a company like Sony. Again, when we talk about the Sony Microsoft thing, we're not talking about two companies in the same stratosphere. Microsoft is a hilariously bigger and richer and more, powerful company than Sony. Microsoft, has Windows still. Their Azure server, system is second to only Amazon's, I believe. They have all of this stuff. And Sony still makes like pretty good TVs and cameras and like the $10 headphones you can buy at Walmart. Like they're just different companies. And that's fine. There's nothing wrong with that. And it makes it all the more impressive that PlayStation has been so dominant in the gaming sphere, despite, Xbox trying to get into it and slaying Sega and all of the stuff that has happened. I just think that we need to remember that we're talking about two companies that are kind of dealing in different, outside of just looking at Xbox and PlayStation, where PlayStation's pretty dominant and is selling, it looks like 2 or 3 consoles for every one Xbox. They're two very, the micro and macro situations here are very different. So I'll be really curious to what happens in the long run. It'll be curious to see if PlayStation is able to spin up a franchise that can, even partially take over, because in 10 years when this deal runs out, I'm sure Xbox will go to PlayStation and be like, okay, let's talk about the next, Call of Duty. Let's do another 10-year deal. But they're going to ask for a ton of money. Xbox is going to say, okay, yeah, we'll do this deal, but you are going to pay us so much money for it because we know how much it's worth to you. So we'll see if PlayStation can get something going in the next 10 years that will make them not think it's that valuable to them. We'll see. Xbox and Square Enix have also, made a pledge to work together during a big live show. A couple or one of the major players at Square Enix on the stage show brought out Phil Spencer, and they basically announced a dedication to working together more, starting with Final Fantasy XIV and bringing that to Xbox. And it seems like they very well could be bringing more Final Fantasy games and other Square Enix titles, basically just Final Fantasy, because they sold off all of their Western studios that made other games. It seems like there's at least something going on here. I have to imagine that Jim Ryan probably didn't love that announcement and such. There's been rumors for years now that Square Enix was going to get purchased by Sony. That, to a lot of people, is still the most likely big acquisition to happen anytime soon. And this makes that seem weird. This makes that seem less likely. And so I'm really curious to how this plays out in the long run. If we'll see, Final Fantasy 16 ever hit Xbox after their like 5-year deal ends, or whatever deal I'm sure Sony strong armed them into, and in other future Final Fantasy games, and the Final Fantasy 7 remakes and stuff like that. So Xbox is pretty desperately trying to get any kind of traction in Asia, and especially Japan, where they just get like, there's places where Xbox and PlayStation compete pretty well. There's places like the United States where Sony has a pretty good lead, but Xbox is still doing well. And then there's places like Japan where Xbox, I believe the Xbox One generation literally sold like maybe hundreds of units, and maybe never even got more than that, because I know that they sold more Xboxes of the current gen in like a few weeks than they did of the entire previous gen. And I think it was the Series S, which sold extremely well in Japan for whatever reason. So this deal with Square Enix is interesting. Again, I think it kind of throws a loop into those acquisition rumors of Sony quite a bit. And it would be interesting if they do go ahead and buy them out. But right now, Xbox is putting in a bunch of financial deals, a bunch of contracts on future games, where kind of like what happened with some of the games at Bethesda ZeniMax, where Sony may end up acquiring Square Enix, but they may be forced to release at least a few games on Xbox still, as time moves forward. We will have to wait and see. I'm very curious about what comes from this. Next story, Escape from Tarkov has wipes incoming. So if you know how Escape from Tarkov is a first-person shooter, survival-ish, extraction, PvPvE game. And it's a game where you have tasks and missions. You go into a map and you kill AI, or you kill other players and you take their loot, especially if it's better or if it's very valuable, and you can go out and sell it. And it's essentially, it's still in beta. It's eternally in beta. And a big event in this game is called a wipe. And it typically comes when they're introducing a new map or some big update to the game that they want to test out on people from the beginning of the game to nothing. And when they do a wipe, they wipe the progression and the gear and everything of everyone in the game all the way back to level 1 with nothing. And they do this about every 6 months. Now, this situation has been unique, that it's been a little longer, or it's going to be looking at more like 7 or 8 months. The last wipe was back in December of 2022. We're now looking at the next wipe being in August of 23. And what's interesting is that they've already kind of come out and said that like, and the next wipe is in December. So like they're going to do a wipe now, and then they're going to do a short session, and then December will have another wipe. So it'll be interesting to see if there's people who play less or more because of that, because they know it's a shorter round this time. There's some people who think that the wipe in December may be the 1.0 and the game coming out of beta. I don't think that's true. I think that will happen sometime at the end of next year in 2024, but we'll have to wait and see. I'm somewhat clued in on this game. I do enjoy this game a lot. It just also gives me a ton of anxiety. And depending on the mental state I'm in when they do a wipe, I either will play a ton for months, or I'll play a little bit for a couple weeks and then bounce away. So we'll have to see what happens this time. They did do some big updates to their roadmap. There's a whole new version of the engine that they're working on. They use Unity, which is kind of the little brother competitor to Unreal Engine. It's got a lot of issues, and it seems like the people who own it have some kind of harebrained ideas, and it just isn't as good of an engine as Unreal, but it's a lot cheaper to license it. So you see a lot of companies trying to use it anyways, because it's the closest thing to Unreal that isn't Unreal. It just isn't Unreal. So, a lot of these roadmap updates are interesting. It's Battlestate Games, who makes Escape from Tarkov, is like pretty famous and extremely well known for the fact that they have never ever actually met a timeline that they've ever set for themselves. It's game dev, and so that's one way of looking at it, is that these things happen, and they never happen when you want them to, and things like that. But there is also something to be said for the consistency of their inconsistency. So Escape from Tarkov is a really unique game. I've got some personal issues with playing it. I think the devs are extremely shady. I think that if you look at the story that is presented in the game, it very much mirrors a lot of the rumors and a lot of the conspiracy theories that Russia floated to justify their invasion of Ukraine, like Western scientists making super soldiers. That's very much one of a big plot point in Tarkov, in that the Russian government was trying to investigate this Western company that was making serums that would make people super soldiers. I mean, it's, sometimes reality becomes life, or fiction becomes real, or the truth is stranger than fiction. So there's a bunch of kind of grody stuff about Tarkov, but it also is one of a kind, and there's tons of extraction games coming out right now, and just not a single one of them captures the quote unquote magic of Tarkov. There's something different about it. It's a janky mess that's shady, but it also seems like it's staying popular because no one else can really recreate it. So we'll see. Starfield had a fun little update, probably a kickoff to their marketing for the next month until the game comes out. They had these settled system shorts post on YouTube. There were 3 of them. I do suggest you go check them out. There's no dialogue. It's all told just in visuals and music, and the music is just wonderful. And what I liked about them is I saw some people be like, well, these aren't that big of a deal. I don't know why everyone's excited about this. It's because they aren't meant to be these like cyberpunk style, little shorts where they just like present a thing that is nowhere even close to anything you're ever going to do in the game. And it's just purely cool factor. The 3 stories told in these settled system shorts, I can almost guarantee will be side stories or very similar to side stories that we run across on the game and in the game, and side missions and little side quests, or just environmental storytelling. I can almost guarantee we're going to run into the 3 scenarios presented, and that's really exciting. I think this was very much meant to be okay, here's a little wink wink at what the kind of stuff that may be coming to you here in a month. So I found them to be really, really awesome. I'm going to do a whole separate video talking about them, so you can catch that later this week or next week. And Starfield, can't wait. Letting the hype just happen. Some hype. Speaking of hype, the next story is about Armored Core 6 gameplay previews. So it appears that a bunch of journalists and pundits were given pretty significant gameplay time with Armored Core 6, and a bunch of pretty well-known creators posted their thoughts and some video and stuff like that this week. And this game's interesting. It seems it's getting like more and more into my jam, where like I'm interested in it, where I'm not typically interested in FromSoft games. And the thing is, though, is I played Armored Cores. I played at least 2 or 3 of them in my younger days, and every time they seem kind of fun for a minute, and then I just kind of lose interest. And everything that I've heard them talk about and show about this game seems like it's right up that alley. So this is one of those ones that I'm gonna hope that maybe one day it hits Game Pass in a very long time. I don't think I can really justify spending $70 knowing that Starfield's around the corner, and I'm gonna play that game for hundreds if not thousands of hours. And I'm finding it real hard to justify spending money on anything that isn't just going to be on Game Pass right now. So Armored Core 6 sounds like it's going to be really good. It seems like for fans of the series, it's going to be amazing. It seems like it's going to be a pretty good entry point for a lot of people. I'm still not completely sold, and it's just a fact that with Starfield coming, and then even like Baldur's Gate 3 and stuff, coming very soon, it just has a tough hill to climb. I just think it's got a tough situation there. So we'll have to wait and see what happens. Okay. So I just wanted to do a quick discussion because especially with Starfield coming out soon, even Baldur's Gate 3, Spider-Man 2 coming, will gaming journalists and pundits even consider a game of the year that isn't Zelda Tears of the Kingdom? This has been kind of an interesting thing for me to think about ever since Tears of the Kingdom came out and got its just stellar, reviews and even today, like there's still a lot of podcasts that I listen to that, and maybe you do as well, where there's still people going on about this game and talking about how amazing it is, how much they love it, to the point where there's even some some of the review sites and podcasts and stuff I listen to, some of these crews have people on them who are just being like, yeah, Tears of the Kingdom is the best game I've ever played, and I don't think I'm even going to touch Starfield. And that's fine. People have different preferences. I'm sure these people love Breath of the Wild, and maybe they just aren't into space games or into Bethesda style games. But like, to me, if you're trying to be a podcast or a creator or a group of journalists or whatever, and you're expecting me at the end of this year to sit around and listen to people sit around and talk about their favorite games of the year, a game like, I think that there has to be at least 2 or 3 games every year where everyone just says like, yeah, I'm going to play it and I'm going to go hard because, these are the top contenders and I'll try to play the other ones. Now this year would make that especially hard because there are legit going to be 10 plus games that I think you can make pretty good arguments for game of the year. And then if you include remakes like Resident Evil 4, Dead Space, and so on, then it gets even more complicated. But I really do have to say that, if there's any reviews or any of these conversations that happen, that, it happens where it's like, it's obvious that Tears of the Kingdom is going to win. And especially if there's members of these conversations who just straight up say like, yeah, I just didn't play Starfield. Seems like too much. After spending hundreds of hours of playing some of these other games, I mean, to me, it's going to pretty much cheapen and make pointless any of those conversations. And at the end of the day, that they are pointless. Even the Game Awards, that Jeff Keighley runs, that is probably the one that gets the most votes from the most unique people, and or there's some diversity in the voting base, the people who are voting, all of the different creators and journalists around the world that get asked to do that. The issue I have though is that it almost seems like among a lot of these folks that there's almost like a rebellion against Starfield of like, it's like cool to not be excited about it and to just instantly write it off, or and especially any of them who talk about like, well, Tears of the Kingdom is my game of the year already, despite all of these other games that have come out or are coming out, and it's all about the conversation of what's second. Like that's just not true. I think it seems like there's a consensus that a lot of people aren't expecting Spider-Man 2 to be a game of the year contender. They're expecting it to be a very good game, but it doesn't seem like anyone's really expecting it to be like the best game of the year, but it may make, a lot of people's top 5 list, and it's I just don't think that should be the same attitude we have for something like Starfield, or even like Baldur's Gate 3 and stuff like that. We're like, I really think that, people need to realize that, especially for Starfield, this is the first new IP from them. This is the first game in a long time after they made a small step forward with their engine and such. And it seems like, they're taking an even bigger step this time. I really hope that other games get a fair shake, because, like last year with it being a very obvious Elden Ring and God of War Ragnarok race, there were other games that, I think should have gotten a lot more talk, and that were just as good as those games. My game of the year last year was A Plague Tale Requiem, and that game got a lot of nods and being like nominated for Game of the Year and other awards, but didn't win any of them because the other two games cleaned up everything. So we'll see. I mean, I guess if I was a big Switch fan and had, and played Tears of the Kingdom and stuff, I would probably have a different tune here. But as someone from the outside, when I see reviews and gameplay and people streaming Tears of the Kingdom, just to me, it just doesn't scream like this is the best game I've ever seen. And I understand it's about the systems and things like that. But I suspect that we'll see some equally impressive systems and such from some other games this year. But we'll see. Diablo 4 Season 1 has been through quite the journey in the 2 weeks since I recorded my last podcast. They went from releasing a patch that everyone hated and the Season 1 being underwhelming and the rewards not being very good, to doing a couple like community chats where people still seemed a little perturbed, but at this point seem like generally happy with some of the reversals they're doing and stuff like that. It's what for me, Diablo 4 has lost me. I played through the story, I enjoyed it, but even before Season 1 came out and even before they did all of these changes, I kind of have had my time. I think a big issue is that in the lead up, and I've talked about this with other games, I played through the first 10 to 15 hours of Diablo like 3 or 4 times with the closed and open betas and all that stuff. So for me, it's just one of those things where I'm like, yeah, okay. Like, if they put out some story DLC and things like that, I'll probably be interested. But I could care less. I have negative 100 desire to go through and, grind and level in-game stuff and grind these seasons and do this battle pass and all that. Like, nope, no thanks. I thought Diablo 4 was an insanely good game. It's easily in my top 5 this year. But I'm not gonna play 1,000 hours of it. I'm good. And so it is interesting to have kind of that take on it and then see everything that's been going on since in the background, because I just don't care. Like, I just couldn't care less about what they're doing with all this stuff. But for the people who do care, it's been quite a roller coaster, and I do like feel bad for them. I feel bad that people feel like they're getting kind of screwed over here, or kind of going on a roller coaster of good news and bad news, the ups and downs. But it seems like they're getting it together. It seems like they're figuring out what they need to do to try to satisfy the community, and we'll see how they do that in the long run. The Crew Motorfest first impression. So I was lucky enough and very appreciative to have Ubisoft offer me an early access code for their closed beta. I even got to stream, and I had Twitch drops. So if people wanted to try to earn themselves a beta code for this, they were able to. What I kind of said before, in that the Crew Motorfest, when it was shown at the Ubisoft show, just looks like Forza Horizon 5 at home, and it's exactly what it is. It's interesting. It actually feels okay to play. I thought the controls felt pretty good and stuff, and it's a pretty game if you don't compare it to anything else. And that's not meant to be as big of an insult as it surely sounds like. It looks like a last gen game. It looks like a very pretty last gen game, but it ran pretty well from what I could tell. But and the controls were pretty good. But like, God, Ubisoft just needs to stop with these intros that have like characters talking. And like Riders Republic was such a cringe fest of a game, and it felt fine to play. I didn't particularly like it, but like just their attempts to have these like, hey man, welcome to Race Island, and this is where you're gonna find your new journey. Like, it's awful. It's so bad. So I beg and plead for Ubisoft to stop doing that stuff, because it's cringy in its own right, and then it's even worse when you start actually playing the game and it just kind of feels like this empty mess compared to like Horizon 5. I'm sure it's going to have its fans. The last Crew game got like years of support, even though I couldn't believe anyone was playing it, because it had the cardinal sin of being a driving game that felt bad to drive. Motorsport feels a lot better to drive, and I think it's actually pretty satisfying in that way. It just, I just don't know who was asking for this. There's a better version of this already, and so we'll see. We'll see what happens with the future of the Crew. Xbox is sunsetting their live service, so they're replacing Xbox Live Gold with the Game Pass Core. It'll be the same price. It will include online play, and it will have access to 25 plus games that will, and more will be added as time goes on. So it's kind of like a cheap Game Pass, but the big thing about it is it's the exact same price as their current Game Pass Gold. So you don't have to do anything, which wink, wink, like they're obviously doing this on purpose so that they can try to keep people on there who don't realize that they're paying for the service. Maybe they haven't had an Xbox in 10 years, but they still have that attached to their credit card, and it's going to stay there until they notice. So the replacement with this Core thing, all of this seems fine to me. The weird thing is that there's Game Pass Core that has internet in some games. There's Game Pass Console, which doesn't have internet access, but has the typical Game Pass library, or what I mean by online, by like multiplayer online play. The console version doesn't allow it. I don't know why. And then we have Game Pass PC, self-explanatory, and then Game Pass Ultimate, which is PC and console, and it has the internet, the multiplayer included, and stuff like that. So, they're starting to get into Sony territory of having overcomplicated names for their streaming and their online stuff. But overall, I don't think this is a bad thing. This seems the base, Game Pass Core does seem to have all of the things that it needs now, and maybe now they need to work on simplifying it or adding value to Game Pass to really get people to jump on this hard, especially after Starfield comes out and Forza's coming and Hellblade 2 next year and so on and so forth. So we will we'll see. NVIDIA 5000 series GPU rumors. So this is kind of an interesting one. So rumors came through that they may be upgrading the memory bus, at least of the high-end cards, to 512 bits, and that the max VRAM of the 5090-ish cards, the high-level ones, could be around 32 gigs, which would be a pretty big jump now. But really the first point is maybe the bigger deal. So the memory bus, I don't know every technical thing here, but basically it's good to have a memory bus with lots of memory in it. And one of the issues from the 3000 series of GPUs for NVIDIA to the 4000 is they reduced that. Now they claim that they had made up for that loss with speed in other places, and maybe they have. The reviews I've seen don't seem to say they have, but maybe they have. It seems it's the limiter. It's the thing that has limited a lot of people, and made them realize that, yeah, sure, maybe these 4000 series GPUs have more power technically, but because they don't have this upgraded memory bus, that power is kind of limited. It's the memory bus is the tires of the engine that is your PC power. And if the tires aren't good and they're bald and they're slippery, then, it kind of makes the whole machine pointless. So I'll be curious to what they do with this. I thought I was in the market for a 16 gig 4060, but they are pretty commonly being shown to barely being any more powerful than my 3060, despite having twice as much VRAM. So I'm probably waiting until this 5000 series, and maybe they've learned their lesson with all of this gouging and stuff in the current gen, and maybe we'll get a game that, or a console that, or hardware that doesn't seem like it's completely bloated beyond all belief. Ubisoft account closure facts. This is a quick one. A bunch of creators and people on social media and stuff flipped out about a email that was received by a user telling them that their Ubisoft account was going to be shut down for inactivity. And what came of it eventually was that it wasn't that simple. And it's a thing that won't impact most people. And so obviously all the clickbaiters went hard on this because dunking on Ubisoft is pretty easy these days. But the fact of it is that, sure, if you open a Ubisoft account, Connect or whatever it's called, and you never buy anything, you never do anything with it, eventually they will shut it down. But if you've purchased games, they won't shut it down. If you're active, they won't shut you down. Like, I understand that this is a big argument for like game preservation and stuff, because in theory they could take away your whole library without you even knowing it. But I think that, I think this was a big nothing burger, and I think a lot of the people who push this so hard should probably apologize to Ubisoft. As gross as that sounds to say, it's probably the best bet. There's a new Xbox dashboard design. It actually does look really good. It's nice and clean and simple. I'm a big fan of it. I've seen some people complaining that they still have ads at the bottom that take up too much space. I mean, that's what Xbox does. They have ads in their dashboard. They are like 99% always related to games, and even games that you care about. I have seen very little complete fluff from the Xbox dashboard ads, where like if you have a Roku, some of the stuff that they advertise to you is hilarious because it obviously isn't your jam. But I think the new Xbox dashboard design looks great. I am really bummed that they have announced that their desktop companion app, they are sunsetting it. Years ago they introduced the Xbox app, and that was supposed to replace the companion app. The problem is that the Xbox app is fine. You can download your games, do all kinds of stuff there, but you still can't view your media, your screenshots and video captures. And so I've still been using the companion app for that stuff, and now apparently that's going away. So I really hope we see that functionality in the Xbox app eventually at some point, because downloading the highest quality possible screenshots from that, in my opinion, was always better. But we'll have to wait and see. And then finally, the Twitter rebrand and some other stuff. So Twitter's called X now, apparently. I'm going to call it Twitter forever. You're going to see it referenced to here as Twitter. There's just no way I'm going to say, follow me over on X. Not happening. You know what it is. I know what it is. And I think it'll probably become fairly insignificant before I even begin to get used to it. So you can find me over on Twitter as Bond Diesel, and you can find me on Threads as Bond_Diesel, and we'll leave that there. As for other changes, this episode is coming out on Monday morning. I think I'm going to stick with that. My plan will still be to record episodes on Friday afternoon or evening, but then to put them on Patreon for a few days and give those people a little more value for their investment and their help and their tips. So consider it. If you want to listen to it over the first weekend, you'll want to probably get onto Patreon and become a patron for as little as $1. Everyone gets the episodes early with no commercials, and then we will have and then we'll just go from there. So my plan right now is to release podcast on Monday morning, and then have videos on Wednesday and Fridays. And then have like a VOD replay or something on Tuesday and Thursday mornings. But, that's dependent on streaming, which right now, has been a struggle, and I've not been doing much of. Bay Diesel's going back to school to start teaching again here in the next month, which means our little one will be occupied, and I will be able to get back to some kind of semblance of a schedule to stream more and stuff like that. But I always tell people the summers for me are kind of tough, and they will probably continue to be that way. So thanks for hanging out. Thanks for listening. I do appreciate it. I also appreciate the patience while I was sick and while things were kind of crazy. Listener questions. If you have your own questions, be sure to use the Google form questionnaire, ask in our Discord, ask in the YouTube comments, or hit me up on Twitter at Bondiesel or at the EchoCast. The first question here is from YouTube's. Mass Effect question per usual, and maybe a good question for a group discussion. Nope, we're doing it right here. The Mass Effect races of the original trilogy were all very intricate about which made them that much more interesting. I would like you to see pre-existing races expanded on. Any customs, principles, or beliefs that you'd expect a certain race to have that haven't really been touched on or in lore. So I think a lot of it has been touched on in lore, maybe, but I would really like to see in-game representation of how the politics works, like in person for the Turians, for the Solarians, even for the Asari. I would be interested in seeing what a fully stocked up, staffed Krogan government looks like, and in this new age, or this cure of this genophage. I'd be really curious to see some of their more inner workings. But I think more than anything, because they're one of the species I personally care for the most, but the transition of the Quarians, assuming they get their planet back in however they handle the ending, it'll be really interesting to see how they go from being spacefaring kind of wanderers around the galaxy and scavengers, and see how they change or don't based on being able to take back their homeland. I have this really cool vision of seeing like buildings and skyscrapers like clearly made from the carcasses of a bunch of the Quarian ships, where they've like repurposed them for temporary housing, and now they're building up on them and stuff. I think that stuff sounds really interesting. So yeah, a lot of their cultural and especially the Quarian cultural and societal things, I think would be really interesting to see them expand on. But even though I believe a lot of that stuff has been kind of addressed or at least peeked at in the comics and cartoons and so on and so forth. Good question. Master Prime asks, what other studio or publisher do you think Microsoft will buy next? I don't know. I think they're definitely going to continue acquiring. There's been the rumors for a long time of Sega. That would be kind of interesting with like Sonic and things and all of their very old school, but their significant number of IPs they own. I suspect that we'll see them purchase like small studios for quite a while if they do any acquisitions. I think it's Moon Studios that does Ori. It wouldn't surprise me if they snag them up. I think we'll see a lot of, if you remember, Undead Labs was an acquisition they had years ago. It's the makers of State of Decay and State of Decay 2, and now the people who are making State of Decay 3. I think that we'll see acquisitions like that, where these studios who have been putting out some games with potential that seem like they have some talent, and Xbox is going to say, okay, come under our wing. Here's a bunch of money, make some cool stuff. And especially with the acquisition of ABK coming up, I think it'll be interesting to see what they allow some newer employees and people to do when it comes to side projects and things like that. So again, another good question. Thank you, YouTubes and Master Prime. Again, if you have your own questions, please hit me up on the questionnaire, all of the links for everything are at the Linktree link in the description, no matter which way you're listening to this podcast. Please go in there, support my other content, become a patron if you want, share this stuff, get in the Discord. The Discord's a pretty good option these days, and we'll talk about stuff and you can ask me questions. And that's where we're going to wrap things up. So thank you so much for listening. I am happy to get any feedback and that you have. Please let me know in all the channels that I've talked about before. You can find me all over the internet as Bond Diesel, including on Threads, on Twitter, on YouTube, on Instagram, and over on Twitch. I do plan on beginning to stream a lot more here soon over on Twitch. And once YouTube gives me my partnership, I'll probably multi-stream, and you can support on either or watch on either and chat on either, and it will work for everybody. The big reason I've waited on YouTube is I think I don't like that people don't have emotes and stuff like that. Once I'm partnered, you will have that. So and I'll have memberships available on YouTube as well if you prefer to give Google your money instead of Amazon, because whatever. If you can let's see, find me over on the other places. If you want to support my content, check out patreon.com/bonddiesel. Subscribe over at Twitch, or check out my merch. That is in the Linktree link in the description over on Streamlabs. That's all I have for this one. So until next time.